Today is the wedding day of the beautiful bride Emily, but the dog that has been with her for more than 12 years is in the way, for a shocking reason. The church bells tolled softly, their echoes mingling with the crisp autumn air as Emily Parker stared out of the window of her father's delicate car. The gravel road leading to the small country church was edged with maple trees, their leaves ablaze in fiery oranges and reds. The day was perfect, just as she dreamed since she was a little girl. Yet, beneath the ivory lace of her gown, her heart felt like it was pounding in her throat. "You okay, sweetheart?" her father asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. His voice held warmth, but she could hear the worry beneath it. Emily smiled faintly. "Yeah, Dad, I'm okay." But she wasn't. It wasn't wedding nerves. Those would have been easier to handle. It was something else, something gnawing at her deep inside, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Beside her, Samson shifted. Her 12-year-old golden retriever, graying around his muzzle, had been her shadow since she was 17. She'd found him abandoned by the river on a cold spring morning, a shivering, scrappy pup with big brown eyes. From that day on, they'd been inseparable. Through her mother's illness, late-night cries over heartbreaks, and the exhausting days of nursing school, he was her rock before she even knew what having a rock meant. Today, Samson was the official ring bearer, decked out in a tiny black bow tie that looked almost comical on his sturdy frame. Emily reached down to scratch behind his ears, and he let out a soft, almost pained whine. She frowned. "What's wrong, boy?" she murmured. His big brown eyes stared up at her, and for a moment, she saw something different in them. Something distant, pleading. Before she could think much of it, the delicate car rattled to a stop in front of the church. Her father hopped out quickly, coming around to her side. "All right, kiddo, this is it," he said gently, extending a calloused hand to help her down. "Ready to go make history?" Emily tried to smile. She took his hand and slid out of the delicate car, careful to gather her dress so it wouldn't snag on the door. Samson jumped out after her, landing stiffly on his paws. "Good boy," she said softly, glancing at him again. He stood there for a moment, staring at her, longer than usual, as though he were hesitating. "Sam?" Emily's brow furrowed. Something was definitely off. But before she could dwell on it, her father clapped his hands together. "We're running late, Em. Come on, showtime." He turned toward the church doors, which had already swung open. Bridesmaids in lavender dresses peeked out, their faces lit up with excitement, while her best friend, Katie, waved frantically. "Emily, hurry up. Alex is pacing like a lunatic in there." Emily managed to chuckle. "I'm coming." She took a step forward. That's when it happened. Samson moved in front of her, blocking her path to the church doors. "Samson," she said in surprise. She tried to step around him, but he shifted with her, planting himself firmly in her way. His head lowered slightly, and he let out a low, almost sorrowful sound, half a whine, half a groan. "Sam, what are you doing?" Emily's voice wavered as she reached out to touch his fur. His body was unusually warm under her fingertips, and there was a faint tremor in his legs. Her father stopped mid-step, turning back with a confused look. "What's the hold-up?" I don't know," Emily said, worry creeping into her voice. She crouched down, wedding dress be damned, and cupped Samson's face in her hands. "Sammy, what's wrong?" He leaned into her touch, his amber eyes locking onto hers. There was something there, something so deep and full of emotion that her heart stuttered in her chest. A lump formed in her throat. Her father, clearly growing impatient, stepped forward. "Come on, Em. He's probably just nervous. All these people and excitement. It's a lot for a dog." But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just nerves. Samson wasn't acting out of character for no reason. He was a calm, steady dog, even in chaos. She'd brought him to crowded parks, noisy fairs, and vet clinics. He was always unfazed. Emily? Katie's voice called again, sharper this time. What's going on? We need you in here now. Her father reached for Samson's collar. Come on, boy, move. Samson didn't budge. He let out another whine and pressed his body more firmly against Emily, as though trying to anchor her in place. Her heart began to race, and a cold sweat broke out on her skin. Why is he doing this? Her father sighed and stepped back, throwing his hands up in surrender. Emily, you're going to have to do something. The photographer's waiting, the minister's getting ready, and Alex. Emily barely heard him. Her hands trembled as she stroked Samson's head. Sammy, talk to me. Are you okay? Are you hurting? The dog closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting out a shaky breath. A knot of panic formed in Emily's chest. For the past week, Samson had been a little off, eating less, sleeping more. She'd chalked it up to old age and the chaos of the wedding preparations. But now, Dad, she said, her voice quivering, something's wrong. Her father's face softened as he crouched beside her. Emily, honey, it's probably nothing. He's getting old. Dogs get tired. She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. No, it's more than that. I can feel it. I can see it in his eyes. The sounds of laughter and music from inside the church seemed to fade as Emily's world shrank to the golden retriever pressing against her. A feeling of dread tightened around her chest like a vice. What's happening to you, Sammy? Emily? The soft voice cut through the swirl of emotions as Emily knelt beside Samson. She turned sharply and saw Alex standing a few steps away, his tuxedo jacket open, his tie slightly askew. He looked out of place against the backdrop of the picturesque church, the polished, perfect groom amidst a storm of uncertainty. Alex took in the scene. Emily in her ivory gown, crouched on the gravel in front of the church doors, her hand resting protectively on Samson's back. His gaze lingered on her tear-streaked face, and his expression softened with understanding. Alex, Emily began, her voice cracking. Something's wrong with him. I think he's sick. I can't just leave him like this. For a moment, Alex didn't speak. The muffled sound of the wedding music drifted faintly from inside the church, and Emily felt the weight of everything pressing in. The guests waiting, her father pacing anxiously, the perfect day slipping through her fingers. She held her breath, bracing herself for frustration or disappointment from him. How could she explain that she couldn't move forward? Not down that aisle, not anywhere, until she knew Samson was okay. But Alex did something she didn't expect. He walked to her side, crouched down next to Samson, and gently ran his hand along the old dog's fur. Hey, buddy, he murmured softly, as if speaking to both of them at once. What's going on, huh? Samson lifted his head weakly, his brown eyes meeting Alex's for a moment before settling back on Emily. Alex looked at her then, his face calm and steady. Emily, it's okay. Tears welled up in her eyes. But the ceremony. Everyone's waiting. Alex shook his head and took her trembling hand in his. It doesn't matter. Her breath hitched. What do you mean? I mean, we'll figure it out. His voice was low but certain, as if the solution was already within reach. You're not walking down that aisle until you're ready. And if Samson needs us right now, he paused, stroking the dog's graying fur, then that's where we'll be. All three of us. Emily stared at him, shocked. But what about the guests? The church? The reception? Everything we planned? Alex smiled faintly, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. Let me handle that. Handle it? What are you going to do? He squeezed her hand and stood up, brushing dust off his pants. Trust me. Before Emily could respond, Alex turned toward the bridesmaids and groomsmen gathered near the church doors, all of them whispering nervously, glancing between each other. Katie, he called out, his voice firm but calm, tell everyone there's been a slight delay. And please let the minister know we're working on it. Katie blinked, bewildered. Delay? For how long? I don't know yet, Alex replied evenly. Just tell them to hang tight. The murmurs among the bridal party grew louder, and Emily's father frowned, stepping forward. Alex, what's this about? You can't just— I can, Alex interrupted gently, meeting the older man's gaze with unwavering confidence. Sir, I know today is supposed to be perfect for Emily, but she's not walking into that church worrying about Samson. He's been with her through everything. I'm not taking that away from her now. Emily's heart caught in her chest as she watched Alex speak. Give us a few minutes, Alex added. I promise we'll figure it out. Her father hesitated, then sighed, clearly torn. All right, but don't take too long. The guests. I'll handle the guests, Alex said, already pulling his phone from his pocket. Emily stood frozen, her hands still trembling as she watched her fiancé move with calm precision, making calls, giving instructions, and soothing everyone's concerns. She couldn't hear the exact words he said, but his tone was steady, his movements purposeful. He was handling it, this unexpected chaos that no one could have planned for. Samson let out a soft sigh beside her, and Emily instinctively knelt down again to stroke his back. Did you hear that, Sammy? He's taking care of it, she whispered. But a new uncertainty gnawed at her now. What is Alex doing? What does he mean by figuring it out? She glanced toward him, where he stood on the phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. She wanted to trust him. She did trust him, but the suspense twisted in her stomach. Where would they go? What was Alex planning? Would everything, her perfect day, the vows she dreamed of, fall apart? As her mind raced, Alex hung up his phone and turned back to her, his face unreadable but his eyes steady. He walked over, crouched down beside her, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. It's going to be okay, he said softly. But— No buts, Alex whispered, looking between her and Samson. I promised I'd stand by you no matter what. Just trust me. Emily nodded faintly, tears threatening to fall again. She had no idea what Alex had planned, but the way he looked at her, the quiet certainty in his voice, told her that somehow everything would be all right, even if the day wasn't perfect, even if the plan fell apart, because he understood her, because he loved her. And for now, that was enough. Emily sat beside Samson in the back seat of Alex's car, her fingers gently stroking the old dog's fur. Her wedding dress pooled around her like a crumpled cloud, completely at odds with the weight pressing down on her chest. She watched as Alex drove, his jaw set in quiet determination, his hands steady on the wheel. Alex, where are we going? She asked softly, the suspense gnawing at her. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his expression warm but resolute. You'll see. Just trust me, okay? Trust. That word again. Emily looked down at Samson. His breathing was still slow and deliberate, and every time his body trembled slightly beneath her touch, it sent a pang of worry through her heart. He'd been her constant for so long, and now, the fear of losing him threatened to swallow her whole. Alex seemed to sense her unraveling thoughts. He's going to be okay, Em. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. Emily swallowed hard, tears pricking her eyes again. This wasn't supposed to happen today. I know, Alex replied quietly, but sometimes life doesn't care about perfect plans. She looked out the window, recognizing the road they were on now. It wasn't toward the church. It wasn't toward their reception venue. Instead, they were heading to the town's small veterinary clinic. Her breath hitched. Alex, we're going to the vet? Yeah. His voice was calm. It's where Samson needs to be right now, and that's what matters. Emily's emotions tumbled over each other. Relief that someone was finally going to check on Samson, guilt for not realizing how sick he might have been sooner, and a deep, aching love for the man driving them. The clinic came into view, a small, unassuming brick building surrounded by a few trees beginning to shed their leaves. Dr. Peterson's car was already parked out front, and the lights inside glowed warmly through the windows. Alex pulled the car to a stop and turned in his seat to look at Emily. We're here. Let's take care of him first. She nodded, brushing a tear from her cheek as Alex got out and opened the door for her. Carefully, he helped her out of the car, holding her hand as she stepped onto the pavement. Her dress trailed behind her, its pristine lace now dusted with gravel and dirt, but she couldn't bring herself to care. "Come on, boy," Alex murmured, gently lifting Samson from the car. The old dog let out a soft whine but relaxed as soon as Emily placed her hands on him, murmuring reassurances as they made their way toward the clinic. The door opened as they approached, and Dr. Peterson stepped out, looking slightly surprised to see a bride, groom, and golden retriever on his doorstep. "Emily? Alex? What's going on here?" Emily looked at him, her voice trembling. "Dr. Peterson, something's wrong with Samson. He's been off all day. He wouldn't let me walk into the church. He's shaking, and his breathing's been strange." Dr. Peterson's expression softened as he stepped aside. "Let's bring him in and take a look." They followed the vet into an exam room, where Alex gently set Samson down on the padded table. Emily hovered close, her fingers tangled in the dog's fur as Dr. Peterson began his examination. The room was silent except for the occasional rustle of equipment and the soft sound of Samson's breathing. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the vet move carefully, checking Samson's heartbeat, his joints, and his breathing. She barely registered Alex's hand slipping into hers, anchoring her to the moment. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Peterson finally straightened and looked at Emily with a mixture of kindness and concern. "It's a good thing you brought him in when you did," he said gently. Emily's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" Dr. Peterson sighed. "Samson's heart isn't working as it should. I believe he's showing early signs of heart failure. The stress of today, everything going on, probably made his symptoms worse." The room tilted slightly, and Emily gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "Heart failure," she whispered. Dr. Peterson nodded. "It's common in older dogs, especially large breeds. But don't worry, we can manage it with medication. He'll need rest and care, and I'll want to monitor him closely moving forward. He's a fighter, Emily, and he's lucky you noticed something was wrong." Tears spilled over her lashes as she leaned down, pressing her forehead gently against Samson's. "I'm so sorry, buddy," she whispered. Samson let out a low, comforting hum, as if to say he wasn't holding it against her. Emily felt Alex's hand on her shoulder. "He's going to be okay, Em," he said softly. "We'll take care of him. Together." She looked up at him then, the love and unwavering support in his eyes breaking through the emotional storm inside her. "Alex, I can't believe you did all this for me. You and Samson are a package deal," he said with a faint smile, brushing a tear from her cheek. "And I love both of you. The wedding can wait. This is what matters right now." Emily took a shaky breath, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and gratitude that she couldn't quite put into words. "But what about everyone at the church?" she asked after a moment, the weight of everything she'd left behind pressing at the edges of her mind. Alex's expression turned faintly mischievous. "Don't worry about that. I made a few calls." Emily frowned, confusion flickering across her face. "Calls? What do you mean?" He squeezed her hand, his smile both reassuring and cryptic. "You'll see soon enough." For now, Emily didn't press him. The uncertainty of his words left her with a strange mix of suspense and anticipation. But as she looked down at Samson, still sprawled comfortably on the exam table, and back at Alex, her husband-to-be, she realized something profound. Even though nothing about today had gone as planned, she was exactly where she needed to be. Emily sat on the cold bench outside the exam room, her wedding dress crumpled around her as she absent-mindedly ran her fingers over Samson's leash. The vet staff had moved him to a recovery area after administering the first dose of medication, and though they'd assured her he was stable for now, Emily couldn't quiet the knot of worry in her chest. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled her phone from her lap, opening it to find dozens of missed calls and texts. Messages poured in from friends, family, and the bridal party, all asking the same thing. Where are you? Is everything okay? What happened? She shut the phone off and buried her face in her hands, the weight of the day pressing down like a stone. This was supposed to be our wedding day, she thought, tears threatening to break through again. Emily? Her head shot up, and there stood Alex, still in his tuxedo, the shirt now wrinkled, the tie hanging loose around his neck. But his smile, soft, patient, full of love, made her heart skip. He walked toward her, holding 2 cups of coffee. I figured you could use this. Emily managed a small smile as she took the warm cup from him. Thanks. Alex sat beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers, grounding her. For a while, they sat in silence, sipping their coffee as the quiet hum of the clinic surrounded them. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. Alex turned toward her, startled. What? Why are you apologizing? Because, she gestured helplessly at her disheveled dress, the empty clinic hallway, the complete mess the day had become. This isn't what today was supposed to look like. It was supposed to be perfect, and instead, Alex gently took her hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Hey, who said it isn't perfect? She looked at him, incredulous. Are you serious? Yes. His voice was firm but tender. It might not be what we planned, but I think it's more meaningful, don't you? Emily blinked back tears. How can you say that? Because today, you showed me exactly who you are. Someone who loves without hesitation, who puts the people and dogs she loves first, no matter what. That's the woman I want to marry. It's not about the flowers or the church or the timeline. It's about us. Emily opened her mouth to argue, but Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and delicate. Her breath caught. It was a tiny white ribbon tied to a silver ring, Samson's collar bow tie. Alex, what? He smiled, kneeling in front of her, wedding suit and all, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Here's the thing, Em, he said softly. The wedding isn't just about showing up at a church or saying the words in front of a crowd. It's about this, about showing up for each other when it really matters. And you're here, with Samson, because this is where you need to be. And I'm here with you because you're where I need to be. Emily's heart twisted, a tear slipping down her cheek. But the ceremony? We're not done yet. Alex's grin grew mischievous. I told you I had a plan. Before she could question him, the clinic door opened, and a familiar voice echoed through the hallway. Emily. Alex. Emily turned, her eyes widening in shock. Standing in the doorway was her father, still in his suit, alongside Katie, Alex's best man, and the minister. The minister, holding a small leather-bound book. Behind them, a few close friends and family peeked inside, wearing expressions of both relief and joy. Dad, Emily said, stunned. What's going on? Her father smiled, his voice gruff but affectionate. Alex made some calls. If the wedding can't happen at the church, we'll bring it to where you are. Emily turned to Alex, who was now grinning like a kid who'd pulled off the greatest surprise. You didn't think I was letting you off the hook that easily, did you? But here? At the clinic? Emily stammered, looking around at the sterile walls, the faint scent of disinfectant, and the vet's staff now peeking curiously from behind the counters. Why not? Alex said simply, standing and holding out his hand. Samson's here. You're here. I'm here. What else do we need? The lump in Emily's throat grew too big to speak around. Katie and her father began spreading out blankets and flowers they grabbed from the church. The minister cleared his throat with a warm smile. Well, I've certainly never done a wedding in a vet clinic before, but there's a first time for everything. Emily let out a soft, watery laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. You're unbelievable. Alex grinned, his hand still extended. I'm just in love with you, and I'm stubborn. Emily took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. She glanced at Samson, who lay quietly on the floor, his eyes open and watching. His tail gave the faintest wag. "This okay with you, buddy?" she whispered, leaning down to scratch behind his ears. The old dog let out a contented huff, and Emily swore she saw approval in his eyes. With that, she turned back to Alex. "Let's get married." And so, in the quietest corner of Riverside Veterinary Clinic, surrounded by family, friends, and the steady hum of the machines keeping Samson comfortable, Emily Parker married the love of her life. As the minister spoke, Samson lifted his head just enough to rest it against Emily's dress. The sight of it, her old friend there for this moment, made her heart swell with love and gratitude. When the vows were exchanged and the words, "You may kiss the bride," were spoken, Alex leaned in and kissed her gently, his arms wrapping around her as if he'd never let her go. The small room erupted into cheers, tears, and laughter. Samson let out a quiet woof, as if offering his approval, making everyone laugh through their tears. It wasn't the wedding Emily had imagined. It was better.